Welcome to Positive Philter with your host, Philip Wilkerson, a podcast that focuses on friends, family, health, and career, with a little self-help along the way. Please join me in this journey for self-improvement, and I hope what I have to share will make you a better person, thus making the world a better place. I hope you enjoy the show. I hope you enjoy the show. Hello, people. The world is Philip Wilkerson back with another episode of Positive Philter. I'm joined by a special guest. Well, everyone's a special guest, but I'm actually joined by the mayor of Fairfax City. Now, if you know me or follow me on social media, I affectionately call myself the unofficial mayor of Mason. And, I wrote myself in, but I'm actually meeting a real mayor that actually is official. And that was voted in by the people of Fairfax City. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Mayor Catherine Reed to the show. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. This is very exciting. You are the unofficial, I'm just giving you props here. You are the unofficial mayor of Mason. But what we have in common is that we are both Mason Nation people, because I'm the first alumni to ever be elected mayor of the city of Fairfax, although the university's been next door to us for 52 years. So yeah, you might be the unofficial mayor next door, but I'm a Mason alumni who's the official mayor right in the heart of the city.
I love that. And I think that's actually where I was going to go with this story, was learning about your journey, your Mason journey, and particularly how it intersected with local politics. So let's get right to it. Tell us a little bit about your high school experience. Were you close? Were you a Northern Virginia native as well?
No. My arrival here was very circuitous, but very interesting. So I was born in Southwest Virginia. I was born in Galax, Virginia in 1961, which is the same year that Fairfax City became an independent city. There are only, I think, 42 independent cities in the United States, and 38 of them are in Virginia, which means an independent city is one that is not connected to the county they are in or adjacent to. So Fairfax City in 1961 became an independent city, and that was the year of my birth, way down at the southern part of the state in Galax. I went to school in Christiansburg, which is right next door to Blacksburg, where Virginia Tech is. My father is a Virginia Tech alumni, and my brother and sister both went to Virginia Tech. I had a lot of high school classmates who went to Virginia Tech. I actually ended up going to high school in Roanoke County. So I'm a 1980 graduate of William Byrd High School in Benton, Virginia. And I actually had theatrical aspirations. I've been doing theater since kindergarten. And I thought theater was what I wanted my career to be. And so I applied for a lot of grants and a lot of scholarships and ended up at Emerson College in Boston.
I know Emerson.
Emerson's an awesome school. Well, in 1980, the school was located in Back Bay, not where it is now, more downtown. It was in Back Bay. So I lived at 100 Beacon Street. It was a brownstone. It was right across from the public gardens. I was on the 6th floor of the building, and it was a wonderful experience. But I mean, I had never been out of Southwest Virginia. It was like Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm goes to the city. I didn't see the school ahead of time. I got on a Greyhound bus. It took 15 hours on a Greyhound bus with my steamer trunk and my electric typewriter to arrive in Boston, and I loved every single minute of it. But it also brought home that theater is not necessarily a great career choice. It was the first time I had bumped up against peers of privilege. Most of the 1,500 undergraduates at Emerson came from the entertainment industry. Their parents were either in the entertainment industry in New York or in Los Angeles. And the school has a great reputation to this day. It has a great reputation. It's a very competitive process to get into Emerson College. They have turned out many famous actors and journalists and all kinds of people. But I realized that this was probably not a good choice for me. But I joined the forensics team. I'd done forensics in high school, and I did forensics my freshman year at Emerson. And because we were so tiny, there were only 1,500 undergraduates, we kept bumping up against George Mason University. And they kicked our butt because George Mason had the number one debate team in the nation in that division of very small schools. And everywhere we went, they just dominated everything. And so people said to me, I think I was the only person, at least in the freshman class, who was from Virginia. And they're like, well, George Mason University, surely, like, you know about that school. I'm like, I have never heard of this school, and I have lived in Virginia my entire life. So when I decided in the spring that I was not going to come back to Emerson for a lot of reasons, mainly because I started to see that theater was not a good career choice for me, but also it was a very expensive private school, and all my one-time scholarships. You know,
Yeah.
I got the International Thespian Society scholarship. I got the Elizabeth Taylor Warner scholarship for the dramatic art. I mean, I got a lot of free money, one-time money, and I wouldn't trade that year in Boston for anything. But what brought me to Mason was the forensics team.
Uh, I'm lighting up because this is crazy. Like last night, I did a speech to to the Mason forensics team. You know, they invited me as a guest speaker to talk to them, which I didn't know that it's really integrated in the communication department, and they're still killing. They're number two now in the nation.
I know they're killing it. And
Still,
they're a huge school now. They're not
yeah,
a little itty bitty school. They're killing it in a much larger division.
and it's so much of a program that I think supposedly they have like a full-time faculty member assigned to forensics. So can you please, like, this is the perfect tail end to that. Like, tell us about, you kind of got recruited to this top-notch forensics team.
Well, no. So here's the funny. So this is
Yeah.
the twists and turns life takes. Just when you think there's a trajectory here and you're following along going, so Catherine transferred to George Mason University in 1981 to be on the forensics team. Well, I did transfer, and here's the most interesting part of my journey to George Mason is the reason I chose George Mason, other than the forensics team, was that it was a suburb of DC,
Mm-hmm.
and I was not going to be sent back to the farmlands of Charlottesville or Blacksburg or Harrisonburg or all these small towns because I didn't want a small town. Like I was over small rural towns. So there was no dorm on the campus open yet. So when they accepted me in March of 1981, I got an acceptance letter from Mason, but then I needed to find housing. So the dorm was slated to open in August, but then it was delayed. So I ended up staying in Falls Church with my cousin, Jim Graham. Now you've got to really pay close attention because this gets complicated. My cousin, Jim Graham, stayed with my family in Christiansburg in probably 1972 when he was a freshman at Virginia Tech. He lived in Falls Church at the time, but he was a freshman at Virginia Tech and couldn't get housing right away. So he stayed with my family for, I don't know, maybe 2 months or so until he could get on campus. So here I am all these years later, like it's a decade later, and I don't have a place to stay while I wait for the dorm to open. So I stayed with my cousin Jim and his then wife Deb, who they had been high school sweethearts, stayed with them and took the metro bus to get to campus. Well, the dorm finally opened October 25th, 1981. And I know that exact date of the dorm opening because I wrote a letter to my grandmother, which she saved. Turns out she saved all my letters. And in there, I gave her the address and told her exactly what day I was moving in. That's how I know the exact day the first dorm opened, October 25th, 1981. And so I moved into the dorm. So I've been taking the bus back and forth. I move into the dorm. I don't have a car. Well, this is the year that the Q bus started. The Q bus is still going, and it is now a fare free bus here in the city of Fairfax. But I was one of the original Q bus riders on that bus in 1981. So things have a way of coming full circle. The other sort of rabbit hole we're going to go down is that Jim Graham, he was widowed in 1986, and he ended up marrying Ellen. And Ellen and Jim founded Cameron's Coffee and Chocolates in the city of Fairfax, named after their daughter Cameron, and it employs young adults in the intellectual and the developmental disability community. And they started that business back in 1983. So, so life has a way of going in loops and circling back around on itself. And I can't describe to you enough how you never know how you're going to loop back to people in your life at a later time. So now I'm very much involved with Cameron's Coffee and Chocolates. They're here in the city. I'm the mayor. They've been here. They just celebrated their 10 years here. But going back to moving into the campus, I did not end up joining the forensics team.
Okay, I was like, huh, okay.
I did not. So I came because of the forensics team,
Yes.
but I did not end up joining the forensics team. I had a series of work study jobs. That's how
There
I
it is.
funded my way through Mason. So one of my first work study jobs was working for the chairman of the American Studies Department. It
Okay.
was Hans Bergman, and Hans Bergman is now at Quinnipiac, whatever that university is in Connecticut. I can never remember how to pronounce that, but that is where Hans is. And he was chair of the American Studies Department, and he and his wife are doing an index of literary reviews in the New York Tribune. I think it was 1845 to 1848, and computers were brand new. Now you have to turn your Wayback Machine to 1981. Computers were new, and so they were taking their research and inputting the data for this index they were creating into a computer program, and I was hired to do the data entry because
Typing
I
it in.
had computer experience, right?
Yeah.
And computers were new. So that was in the basement of Thompson Hall. That's where the mainframe HP 3000 computer was. This huge computer. It was called a mini computer. It was a huge computer, had its own room in the
Yep.
basement of Thompson Hall, and you did your programming on punch cards.
Well, yeah.
So it was
Yes.
open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Thompson Hall was open because people did their punch cards and then they had to run their programs through. And if you had any errors, it rejected it, and you had to go back and find which card had the mistake to fix your computer programming. I'm sure there are people now, young people, students now just do not have any concept of the
How laborious that
evolution
was. Yeah.
the evolution of computer programming. We have these computers in our pockets called smartphones. You have no idea what it used to be to learn a programming language and to punch out cards and to stand in lines. Literally, people were seated in the hallway, waiting to run their cards through the card reader. So, anyway, I had a terminal in the faculty staff terminal room to put the data in. And Hans Bergman said to me, if you ever run into any problems, go next door and ask John Korb for help. He is the director of administrative data processing for the university. And so that's what I did. The terminal hung up fairly often. The terminal would get hung up, and I would go next door and ask John for help. So John was a 1978 graduate of George Mason University with a degree in decision sciences. There
Okay.
was no computer science degree in 1978. It was decision sciences. So he ended up getting his degree, and he stayed on at the university to work in the computer center. And so when the gentleman, I want to say his name was Colonel Parker, decided to step away from his role as director of university computing services, where was it data processing? I don't remember the title now. But John was 27. And so
Wow,
John got
very young.
hired. Yeah, he was very young. So John got hired as the director of administrative data processing. That's what his title was. And so I met him, and I was 19 or 20 at the time. Anyway, long story short, we got married in 1983. So John Korb is my first husband, my ex-husband, but he is the father of all three of my children, who are now in their 30s. So that's Mason not only brought me my degree in government and politics, it also brought me my husband and the father of my kids.
Wow. And then in the original buildings, right? That was like back then where it was East West Thompson.
Yes.
The buildings.
Yeah, there was like 4 original buildings on the quad. There was like a quad, and then you had Fenwick Library. And the new building was Robinson Hall, which has now been renovated. It's got a second life now. But there were not, and there was the old student union, you know.
Sub One. Was it called Sub One?
Sub One. Yep. Those were the buildings, and the dorm. I think there's a parking garage. There's a parking garage.
Oh yeah, Mason Pond, that one. I remember those dorms.
Yep. Those were the first dorms. Now all the housing's on the other side of the campus.
Yes.
Yeah, but the first dorms were on the city side of the campus, actually.
Gotcha. Then, wow, lots of land, lots of space. you came down. What made you decide your major, like, leave acting to be
Theater.
your
I
major?
know, right? Like theater to government. Well, I've
Yeah.
always been involved in. I've always, first of all, I'm a history buff.
Okay.
And I was always interested in politics. Like I was a fifth grader at Christiansburg Primary School and asked permission to do a bulletin board following the 1972 presidential election.
Got it.
Right.
There it is.
This was my level of interest, right? And so
Yeah.
Mr. Downs was my teacher, and Mr. Downs had to like think about this because politics, no one had ever asked to do anything political in fifth grade. But I said I would give equal space on the bulletin board to both Richard Nixon and Hubert Humphrey, right? Now, this is Southwest Virginia. So, of course, I'm a Nixon supporter because everybody in Southwest Virginia was a Republican in 1972. And if you look at the demographics now politically of Southwest Virginia, it is still very conservative. So, if you're down there, you're conservative. So, I was like, yes, Richard Nixon, 1972. And so I did this bulletin board. So I followed the political
Yeah.
election. I was very interested. And then during Watergate, I actually listened to those Watergate hearings at my grandmother's house that summer when there were hearings every day. I was glued to the television set over the Watergate hearings. And that's very interesting to come full circle to back to Emerson College. I took political thought as an elective my
Mm,
freshman year at Emerson. And Mike Brown was the professor there, long term professor. I think he only recently retired after decades at Emerson College. And this class in political thought, one of the first group projects he had us do, he divided us into groups. And he says, I want you to come up with your ideal government. Like,
mm.
how would your ideal government work? And so each group presented, how we would set up our ideal government. And after each group had presented, Mike Brown said to us, he goes, the point of this exercise was to show you that you are the children of Watergate. So as we launched in, this was right at the beginning of this class in political thought, and his whole point is as we read the great philosophers from Socrates and
Mm.
Aristotle up to Montesquieu and Burke and all of these great political philosophers. His point is that no one creates these ideas in a vacuum. We are all a product of the times we live in. And each of the groups had come up with such a convoluted, complicated system of checks and balances as a response to Watergate that
Yeah.
he said to us, he goes, your government is not workable. But he said, I wanted to demonstrate to you your thought process and the fact that it's based on the fact that all of you are the children of Watergate. And that has stuck with me my whole life, that how we think and how the lens through which we see the world is a lot based on experiences we've had, and particularly as young people. I look at my own children who are in their 30s. My oldest is 38, and my youngest is 34, and they're millennials.
Yeah. Um,
But they are the product of 9/11,
yeah.
especially my two daughters. They
That
are
was
they,
a product of 9/11 too. I'm 39 years old, so
well,
I
there you
remember
go, right? So you
this
remember.
thing. Yeah.
And so there was kind of like life before 9/11, and then there was life after 9/11. And I think we're going to find this with COVID as well. I think we're going to
Yes.
find that.
The children of COVID. Yeah, I totally agree with that.
So we have to realize that all of us are impacted and affected in ways that we do not sit and ponder where our ideas and our worldviews come from. But there's always an overarching historical context for the
Yes.
times that we live through. So I was a child of Watergate. But anyway, that class was great. I found Mike Brown so inspiring that it was not that hard to make the leap when I changed schools from Emerson to George Mason, to make that leap back to a very early interest of mine, which was politics.
Yeah,
And
outside the DC area is crazy. I mean, you're right.
right?
You're in Fairfax, so kind of jumping topic. While you were doing all the computer stuff and doing the cards, were you able as a student to get involved in local politics?
Well, no, I wasn't. And I'll tell you why. Being a work study student is very difficult because all
Mhm.
I did was go to school, go to class,
Yes.
and work. And
Mhm.
then I met John Korb, and so I met John my sophomore year, and I started spending time with John as well. But I went home between my freshman and sophomore year back to Roanoke, And I got a job actually doing data entry in a medical clinic. Again, people with any kind of computer experience were rare. People didn't know what they were. And, people knew that they needed to start using computers, but they didn't know how. And there was not a workforce that had any experience. So I was just at the right time and had enough experience in computers that ended up launching me into jobs throughout my career. I built on this fact that I was very early to have computer experience. And so after my sophomore year, I stayed on campus because with the brand new dormitories, they had all kinds of groups that came on to use campus facilities and they stayed in the dorms. And so I had been a desk receptionist in my dorm as one of my I had several on-campus jobs, but that was one of my jobs was as a desk receptionist in the dorm. That's actually what my job had been at Emerson College. I was a desk receptionist in my dorm. And so I stayed on for the summer as a desk receptionist and I took classes. And I got to stay in the dorm free of charge. So I got a free room in the dorm and I was a dorm receptionist, we brought in a little money, and then I took two classes that year. I took one in French and then I took the history of Northern Virginia with Peter Henriquez, which was a
Oh,
great
history
class.
of Virginia. That'd be
Oh my
interesting.
God, let me tell you, that class was so amazing. Um, Actually, I guess the first summer I was there, it was French. I took two sessions of French, intermediate French and then advanced French. I don't recommend. Don't ask me to in anything in French, right? Like
Mm.
I can read a menu and I can read the French parts of like Tolstoy, but I am not fluent in French. But still, I was getting a BA and not a BS, so I had to have a foreign language. So that was the first summer. Then after my junior year, I stayed on that summer, and that's when I took the history of Northern Virginia with Dr. Peter Henriquez. What a fantastic class! I think we had 12 field trips all around Northern Virginia.
I was about to say, I literally was about to tail into that because then, if you weren't able to get involved in local politics while you were a student, were you still able to take advantage of Northern Virginia and DC in your backyard and historical reference, like go to the monuments and all that?
Absolutely. So that was great. We got a walking tour of like Old Town Alexandria with this woman who was a local historian. She was in her 80s at the time, and it's the summertime. It is so hot, and this woman is just trucking through Alexandria, and we're dragging along, dying of the heat. These students, and it was not a big group of summer school students. Like we took a van everywhere, but we went to Ballsford, we went to Waterford, we went to Woodlawn Plantation, we went to Gunston Hall, we went to Mount Vernon, and so for somebody who's not from Northern Virginia, that one summer school class
Yeah,
got
awesome.
me deeply involved. I walked the spaces, I walked the buildings, I talked to local historians in all of these places as a backdrop to the history of Northern Virginia. My class in political thought is a standout in my academic career. That class with Mike Brown, but the other one is the history of Northern Virginia, the summer class I took with Dr. Peter Henriquez. That was just invaluable to me. It's a highlight. It really
I
is.
feel like we gotta bring that one back. That sounds like something I want to take right now. Like right now, as someone that grew up here and well, I'm a military brat, but Fort Belvoir and all that stuff. But that just sounds like an amazing experiential learning experience.
It
And
was.
reference to your time as mayor, I'm pretty sure that you have all this concept of, like you said, the independence of Fairfax, but just the community around Fairfax, probably from that class, still comes up.
Well, it does. I mean, that's why when we drive through Waterford, I remember, and I have a map in my head. Like we walked the Manassas battlefield. We walked the Manassas battlefield, Balls Ford Bluff, the battles
Mhm.
that took place there. I mean, like I said, I think there were 12 field trips, and it was a great class. And to actually walk, but to hear from individuals, it wasn't just Dr. Henriquez who was telling us the history. It was local people who knew the deep history of each location.
Yes.
And I don't know if anybody has ever done that since. I don't. It's a class that I think would have an enormous amount of interest, especially because we have such an international population of students who come here from around the world.
Mhm.
To be in a class where you got to take field trips and to really understand that the history of all these places, from its colonial origins through the Civil War, through civil rights and massive resistance, that would be an amazing class for Mason to actually offer for people who would really like to understand the history of our
There.
country and of the area, but in an experiential way. We're actually walking through the buildings and really understanding the time periods, because history impacts how we arrived to where we are today. And if you don't understand history, then it's sometimes not, it's perplexing how we got here.
Yes.
So, The Bird Machine, I just finished reading The Bird Machine by Michael Lee Pope, who's a journalist. He lives in Alexandria. And the book came out in 2022 or 2021. But it's not a long book, but it helps to understand how we got where we got. So, for instance, there was an aha moment in that book about the fact that Harry Byrd, whose career expanded from 1922 through his time as a U.S. senator, when he resigned in 1966 and subsequently died shortly thereafter, the impact he had on the Commonwealth of Virginia. But one of them was the shortened ballot. So we only have 3 statewide offices: governor, lieutenant governor, and attorney general. It wasn't always that way. Back in the 1930s, you actually elected the director of education. Things that are now cabinet positions in Virginia were elected by the people. There was a long ballot. So other states, you have other offices that get elected, like commissioner of the revenue or treasurer or secretary of state. These are all elected offices elsewhere in the United States, but not in Virginia. So our short ballot goes right back to Harry Byrd. So
Wow.
these are the kinds of things that if you don't know your history, then you don't know why we're different. We're the only state that has a one-term governor, the only state out of 50 with a one-term governor. And we are one of only 2 states with off-year elections. And we had May elections. And this comes, again, circling back and going down another rabbit hole. Municipal elections in Virginia brought out a low voter turnout because people look at elections as being November. Now, in Virginia, because of our off-year governor's election, we have elections every year. So Virginia is on a 4-year cycle. It's presidential, it's governor, it's midterm, and then it's local elections.
Yep.
Board of Supervisors, school
Yes.
board, sheriff, circuit clerk at court, Commonwealth's attorney. 4 years, 4-year cycle. But every other year in May was your local elections, and that was your town council and your mayors and your treasurer, your town treasurer. So in the city of Fairfax, the voter turnout was 20% or less. So every other May, 20% of the people who were registered to vote, they were the only people who voted in May. And what that created was what I call a board of directors form of government.
Yeah.
Because it's the same 20%. When I say the 20%, it was the same people. And they tended to be older, white, educated, professional property owners.
That were involved. Yeah.
Right? So,
involved and informed. Yeah.
right. So they come out and they vote, and they install the mayor and city council, and there are no term limits in Fairfax City. So some city council members have served for 20 years. And when there was somebody who stepped down or retired or died, and you had an opening, the city looked at it as like, oh, well, there's one opening on city council. Even though the elections are 6 city council members all at large, what it appeared to be is that those city council members were pretty much going to stay there as long as they wanted to stay there, and that the one opening would be filled by someone else. So to me, that was not good public engagement. And there was a lot of resistance in the city of Fairfax to the General Assembly wanting to mandate that May elections be moved to November for every locality. So at the time, our delegate, our senator, the sitting mayor, they did not support moving the May elections to November. But I did, because you need greater voter participation to have a representative government that is reflective of the expanded electorate. So in 2022, which was our first November election, 59% of registered voters voted for the first time in the city's history, which, in my opinion, is the only reason I am the first woman mayor.
I think what you're also alluding to is that normal cycle. Everyone thinks of November to vote, so that was just kind of common sense. And then I was talking to my friend the other day, is that information is readily available, like in May, or the May thing, but people are not really looking for it, right? Like the general public, and that is just a normal, like, not saying like people are sheep or anything, but we're like, oh yeah, November is when we vote. No one thinks of May like that, right? And so, while they can, governments and systems say, hey, we made this available on the website, or it's on channel 13, are we really getting to the people? Because not everyone is. Well, I'll tell you, I'm not watching channel 13. I'm watching the NBA. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm watching sports. I'm not, checking .gov websites as much. Now that I am informed, I am. I'm just saying that the masses are not, right?
No, I agree. And again, that was by design. This is another hairy bird, keep municipal elections in May and keep voter turnout low. I mean, he was a segregationist. He was a Democrat, but he was a Democrat. He was a Southern Democrat, which are also referred to as Dixiecrats. He was a Dixiecrat. And so he was a staunch segregationist. Massive resistance flourished because the state government was controlled by Dixiecrats. The modern Republican Party started with the election of Linwood Holton in the 1960s, and he had settled his family in Roanoke. And he was the first modern Republican, and he believed in integration. So think back. Now you think of how the Republican Party is in modern day under their current leadership. That's not how the modern Republican Party in the South evolved in the 1960s. So it's, again, if you don't know history, then you can't understand how we ended up where we are. But
Yeah.
Linwood Holton was the first modern day Republican. And then the only governor who served 2 non-consecutive terms was Mills Godwin. He ran as a Democrat under the Byrd machine. He ran as a Democrat. And then the next election, Linwood Holton won as the first modern day Republican. And then Mills Godwin ran a second time as a Republican after Linwood Holton. So he's the only governor who has served 2 terms that are not non-consecutive. Terry McAuliffe tried to do that unsuccessfully when he ran against Glenn Youngkin. He was endeavoring to be the second governor to win non-consecutive terms, but history was not in his favor.
Yeah, but also it's interesting because, like, I think I went to GMU and there's Godwin Hall, and I literally did not put it together.
Yes, Mills Godwin. So Mills Godwin was
all the places at VCU, like Wilder. All these names of buildings are like after recent. Or my wife, she taught at Linwood Holton Elementary School, or she was or intern, which is, and then connection Ann Holton. That's his daughter.
That's his daughter. That's his daughter, Ann Holton.
All these historical connections really thrive, and actually, kind of just jumping topics. So then, now that you have all this history, and you're in the near the nation's capital, did you immediately after you graduate go into politics?
Or no, I did not. So the reality is, by the time, I'm class of 1984, which is kind of a bit of a burr under my saddle because I actually finished in December of 1983. So they mailed me my diploma in January of 1984 and said, congratulations, you're but I graduated a semester early because I took classes over 2 summers. So normally I would have graduated in May of 84, but I was done. And so I completed my degree program in 83, but I'm the class of 84. And so by that time I was married. And so my husband really wanted to buy a house. And he's like, we were renting a small little condo over in Burke in the Landings. And he's like, I want a house. And I have to tell you, in 1984, so this was 1984, interest rates, people talk about, oh, the mortgage interest rates are so high. Well, in 1984, they were 18%. Yeah, that was the mortgage rate in 1984. So here I am, a newly minted college graduate with a degree in government politics. John had he moved on? I think John had moved on from the university by 1984 and was working for a government contractor. The government contract was the Navy Payroll Personnel Project. And so we were looking at buying this new construction. It was a Ryan home. In fact, my husband is just now selling that house. Believe it or not, he is the original owner of this house It was constructed in 1984, and he is just now getting ready to put it on the market and move out to Ashby Ponds. So we needed to qualify for the mortgage. And so my husband's like, we need you to have a job that makes X amount of dollars. I think it was, I needed a job that made $15,000 a year. Wrap your mind around that. $15,000 a year in 1984 was still, for a recent college graduate, significant money. So I got a job as a software tester on this Navy payroll personnel project for this government contractor. And I stayed there a year. And then I went on to get another data processing job for a consultant over in Skyline, over in the Skyline Towers. And they were an automotive dealership consulting firm. And again, everybody was discovering how to use computers to crank out massive amounts of data.
Yes.
And so I was there for a year, and that was the year my daughter was born. My daughter was born in 1986, and I was with that consulting firm. So at the end of 1986, my daughter was born in March of 86. In the fall of 1986, I got a job in human resources with Long and Foster Real Estate. So what was interesting, now I'm going to connect dots here that are not obvious. I was the second human, they called it personnel back then. I was the second full-time employee in the personnel department for Long and Foster in 1986. I started there in December of 1986. But my boss, Norma Taylor, was a graduate of Hollins College in Roanoke with a degree in political science.
There it is.
Yeah, because there was no human resources degree program in colleges. So then when we moved into our corporate headquarters, so we were near Prosperity Avenue in Fairfax, and then we moved over to Random Hills Road in Fairfax. West Foster built corporate headquarters over there, and we moved there in 1987. And as we added staff to our personnel department, I don't even remember at what point we became human resources because it was personnel for a long time. All these women, and they were women, all these women in the personnel department all came from political science or government degree program. How crazy is that?
Yeah, people, relationships, historical, policies, these all administration. I think these skills do align with human resources. I mean, if you think about it.
It was strange. But again, at that time, there was no degree in that. You didn't go to college to get a degree in human resources. That came later. And so I was with Long and Foster in that department for a long time. And then I took a sales job with a company for a very brief time. And then I had been divorced when my kids were young. I got divorced. And when I remarried a second time in the mid 90s, my second now ex-husband, is Australian. And his business was the fax business. And going back, I mentioned previously my cousin Jim Graham, who housed me before I got a dorm, and who is now the founding co-owner of Cameron's Coffee and Chocolates here in the city. He started Faxland in the early 90s when fax machines were brand new. Fax machines now, that is such old technology, they're probably young people who couldn't identify a fax machine or understand what it does, like a rotary dial telephone. Fax, what is that? Well, it was new technology in the later 80s, and it was very profitable to have commercial fax machines. They were very expensive, and the toner to run them, it was a very good business to be in. And so my cousin Jim started Faxland, and then he sold the company. So my second husband, Ron Reed, that's where the Reed comes from. My second husband was Ron Reed. He was the general manager at Faxland, which is how I met him. And so when Faxland was sold to a big copier company, the copier company was not interested in the fax business. They wanted to take the accounts, and they were buying up lots of small businesses. They wanted to sell copiers to these law firms and hospitals and these other corporations because that's where the real money was. So my husband, Ron Reed, started Fax World. He started it out of our house. And so I quit my job at that point, which was with Jefferson Title Company. I quit my job, and I became his co-founder, and I started doing, the two of us ran this out of our house until we got space in Seven Corners. And so I ran that, I helped him run that business. I did the books. I was the service manager. There was no job I didn't do. We were small business owners. We were small business owners, and I learned to do every business, every role in that company until we hired a bookkeeper, we hired a service manager, we hired technicians, we hired a receptionist I answered the phones to. That was a great life experience to be a small business owner. And so I was with Fax World until, you know, my marriage was ending with Ron Reed, and I ended up going back to Long and Foster to run a brand new program. Well, the first program was called HomeLink, and HomeLink ended up not not being a viable business model, but Long and Foster decided to keep it as home services, home service connections. It was home service connections, and I was the first director of home service connections. And so that was from 2003 till 2007. And that was just so. The thing I think you need to realize here is that I reinvent myself about every 7 years.
Okay.
Every 7 years, Catherine does something
Different.
totally
New.
different,
Yeah.
totally different. But everything you do in your life, and this is just the thing that young people need to understand when they think their life is going to be in this very neat trajectory. Here's where I started. Here's where I expect to end up, and this is the path that I envision for how I'm going to get there. Life really doesn't work that way. Mainly because things change, opportunities change, industry changes, technology changes, your
Yes.
life changes, the decisions you make change your life. And so I went to Home Service Connections. I was there from 2003 till 2007. And the program was successful, but the company really was not putting resources behind it, which was very frustrating for me. I'm like, why am I running this program if the company itself doesn't really want to support it? So I had a business coach then. His name was Dennis Bruce, is still Dennis Bruce. And Dennis was my business coach. And when the company created templated websites for 18,000 real estate agents. And you have to understand, real estate agents are independent contractors. They are not employees of any real estate brokerage. But the company said we have these templated websites that you can basically plug in your information and you can do online marketing. So Dennis said, Catherine, these folks don't understand technology. Real estate agents have their picture on their business card. They understand how to use a telephone. Like at this point, they had cell phones in 2007, but they don't understand how to do anything they don't understand online marketing. So he said, you understand real estate, technology, and marketing. He goes, why don't you start your own company and sell your services back to Long and Foster? And so in April of 2007, that's exactly what I did. I started Creative Read Inc.
Okay, there it is. Now I see the connection.
See, I mean, you really have to pay close attention to the ups and downs and the twists and turns and the loops and all the things and all the husbands too, right? So many. So I started Creative Read Inc. and I did sell my services back to Long and Foster. I did trainings not just on the creating their own websites, but by this time, social media was in its infancy. People didn't know what Twitter was or Facebook. I got people on LinkedIn and they're like, LinkedIn, what is that? I was on LinkedIn in 2005.
Yeah.
I was in the first 500,000 people to use LinkedIn. Now there's like well over a billion. I was in the first 500,000 people in 2005. So I saw an opportunity to help businesses learn how to use social media tools as they came online, as Facebook came online, as Twitter came online, as LinkedIn got more and more people. So what happened while I was doing this with businesses and I, expanded, I had to diversify my business because when the real estate market crashed over the subprime mortgage collapse, and in 2008, 2009, Long and Foster was like, well, shut down the training. We're not spending money on anything because all of a sudden real estate, the housing industry collapsed. So then I was working with technology companies. I was working with all kinds of companies, teaching them individually how to use the social media tools for personal branding and building their network, but also how to use it for their company. So there I was doing this in 2007, 2008. In 2009, Teresa Champion came to me. She was on the board of the Virginia Autism Project. And she came to me and she said, we need to understand how to use social media to advocate for autism insurance reform in the General Assembly in Richmond.
Okay, so a politic part. Okay, got it.
So they're a nonprofit, all volunteer, all parents. And autism insurance reform was really about medical insurance companies were not covering behavioral intervention for children who had been diagnosed with autism.
So they weren't covering the ABA therapy and all that.
Correct. Like ABA therapy didn't even exist. Like we had to come up after the bill actually passed in the Virginia General Assembly. Governor McDonnell said, well, wait a minute. The insurance companies only have to cover services rendered by a licensed ABA professional. But wait for it. There was no licensing program in Virginia for ABA professionals. So then delay. So it was probably 3 years from the time that the legislation passed saying insurance companies had to cover this to when we had a licensing program to actually license ABA specialists to the insurance companies actually reimbursing parents for what they were paying for out of pocket, right? Now, at that time, there was a cap. They would only cover this until the age of 6. Ridiculous. So then they came back to me and said, what do we got? We got to raise like age of 6. They're just going into first grade. They still need these supports. So we worked. We got the cap raised to the age of 10. And then there was a huge gap where it was the 10 for a long time. So just before COVID hit, for a period of years, and getting legislation passed takes such a long time. It can take a decade to move the needle. But we had a campaign called Crush the Cap. And this is where I continued to work with the Virginia Autism Project on the Crush the Cap campaign. And so that legislation was passed and signed into law by Governor Northam right before COVID hit. And it removes caps entirely for ABA support and therapy for people with autism. It will be covered no matter what age they are. So that was my first nonprofit. But after that, other nonprofits started coming to me word of mouth. So then Virginians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. Michael Stone was the executive director. Dale Brumfield was their field director, came to me and said, how can we use social media? Well, of course, it's not just social media. You have to have a message that appeals to people beyond, like, autism insurance reform had to speak to families that did not have autistic children. And so we had to craft a message that says, you either pay now or you pay later, because when you send children into public schools, when you mainstream children into public schools who have not had behavioral support and therapy, you're going to hire a lot of professionals in the school to support those children. And that impacts your children's education too. That ended up being the winning message for that particular legislative agenda. And so with Virginians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty, again, I started working with Michael Stone, I think in 2010, and it was officially abolished. The death penalty was abolished March 21st of 2021, signed into law by Ralph Northam. And so that's 11 years from the time I started working with VADP to when Virginia became the first Southern state to abolish capital punishment. So, and in between, I have worked with every kind of Virginia nurse practitioners to expand the scope of practice for nurse practitioners. Again, that legislation passed right before COVID. And during COVID, nurse practitioners were the only health care, especially in rural Virginia. There was no health care. And so that expansion of their practice authority came right at the moment, at a critical moment. So when people say, so what did you do before you became mayor? Yes, legislative advocacy with nonprofits, but I stumbled into it. You know, sometimes you find your life's destiny and sometimes it finds you. And working with nonprofits became a mission that I loved. And I knew that the work was meaningful, it was valuable, it was impactful. I could see when something got passed, it was tangible, the impact on families and children and communities that were looking for this kind of relief for their issues. And so I love that work. But that brings us up to June of 2022. Mm-hmm. And I had no expectation, like running for mayor was not on my life plan. I love the work I was doing. I will always love that work and the people and organizations that I work with. But there was only one person running for mayor, and it was an open seat. And I contacted people who had run for mayor before, including Ellie Schmidt, who had run for mayor against David Meyer. That had been a three-way. I'm like, Ellie, if you run for mayor, like, I'll support you. I supported you last time. I'll support you this time. I made phone calls. I'm like, are you thinking of running for mayor? I will support you. I'll raise money. I'll stump. I'll knock doors. And nobody would run. And so the week before the filing deadline, my husband, Tom, I'm married to Tom Greason now, uh, Tom and I came back from Poland. Our only two grandchildren are in Poland, and our granddaughter Violet was born on May 23rd of 2022. And we came back from Poland, and Tom said to me, Catherine, you're going to have to run for mayor because no one else will run. And we cannot have a mayor step into a seat without a single vote being cast. It's just it's unworthy of our community. Our city should be embarrassed by the fact that we can't field two credible candidates for the office of mayor. And so the Sunday before so on Sunday I sent out an email to all of my network and I said, look, I'm going to run for mayor. People showed up to my house that Sunday to collect clipboards and ballot petitions because you need 125 verified signatures from city voters in order to qualify. I had to find a treasurer. I had to register. I had to get a tax identification number. I had to open a bank account. When I was certified on the ballot on the very last day, 10:30 in the morning on June 21st, I became the second candidate for mayor. I had $0 in the bank. Zero. And I did it because I believe in democracy. And as I knock doors and as I talk to people, and people are like, well, so why did you decide to run for mayor? And I'm like, because I believe in democracy and because you deserve a choice. No mayor should step into an office on June 22nd without a single voter casting a vote. That is not how our system of government works. But I was very candid with people. I said, the work I am doing now is very meaningful. I love what I do. I know it makes a difference to our city, to the Commonwealth of Virginia. I know what I do makes a difference. But I said, I'm prepared to step up and be your mayor. But regardless of whether you choose me or you don't choose me, I still win.
You're still gonna do what you want to do.
I still win. And people thought that was the most unusual
I love that mindset. I love it. It's like more like if I get it, it's a bonus. If I don't, I'm still gonna do what I was gonna do anyway.
Yeah, basically that was my message. Like I'll be your mayor, and I'm prepared to be your mayor, but I'm also prepared to continue doing the work that I'm doing because it matters and it makes a difference.
That seems like almost in my mind even very more freeing as a campaign.
It was
because it's like I'm gonna try my best and put a good shot at it and try to step up for leadership. But if I don't get this position, I'm not losing sleep because I'm doing great work anyway. And that feels like it kind of, doesn't make you feel. I mean, I know you still get nervous. You're like, I hope I still win. And
you do. I mean, nobody wants to be a loser. Okay, nobody wants to be a loser.
No one wants to do that. But at the same time, you're like, all right, but like it's almost like I don't got nothing to lose attitude though. Still.
I sort of felt like I really was offering people a choice. And as it turned out, like I said, we had a 59% voter turnout. It was the highest voter turnout ever in a municipal election. Almost 10,000 votes were cast. And I won by 183 votes. And if you think about it, 183 votes isn't a lot out of 10,000. So clearly the public very much had a choice. And in each candidate was seen as a credible, viable candidate. There was no slam dunk here. There was no landslide here. It was a competitive mayoral race. And I think our community deserves that every time.
Yeah. I was about to say, I think that also shows that it should be like that, right? Like you really make a choice between good options. And I think at the same time, I'm thinking also just like in other organizations, not just the election, but like both of them should still be leaders within it. Even if, the second place person still should be a very strong leader, period. Like if you have a landslide, you're like, why we have like those options? That's not really like,
So I have to tell you the bumper sticker. It's not actually a bumper sticker. It's a magnet that I put on my car yesterday. And I found this on Etsy, and I found it on Etsy because I looked for it on Etsy. But this bumper sticker says, you can't love your country only when you win. And that is Joe Biden's best line out of the State of the Union address. You can't love your country only when you win. And that's the way I feel. Win or lose, you still got to love your community, love
I
your
like
city, love your commonwealth, love your country. You got to stay in the game, regardless of whether you get the office or you don't.
I love that. Well, this has been a great. I want to respect your time. So this has been a great episode. We're gonna go to a next segment called Shot for Shot. You get
Okay.
to ask. You get to ask me any random question. I get to ask you any random question. You will go first. I go first.
Okay. So my random question is this: what are your tastes in music? What if you had to really say what your musical genre is, the one that you listen to the most? What is it?
I mean, this sounds very stereotypical rap and hip hop, but I will say this. But recently, this is I like rap and hip hop. I listen to Kendrick Lamar, J. Cole, all that. But sometimes I also do definitely like alternative rock. And recently, they were on campus the other day. This person was selling CDs, which we haven't had in forever. And so I bought the Pearl Jam CD. So I've been listening to Pearl Jam
Wow, that's so throwback.
Yeah, the one from 91 just says like their self-titled album Pearl Jam from 91 with Jeremy and all that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
CDs,
So,
that is so old
so I
school.
do like that you wrote, they say, I got a chance to break the mold and not say my favorite taste is just rock and hip hop. I think I like anything that's has a beat too. So drum, percussion. So rock music too. Something that's not like, I'm not a jazz. Well, if I am jazz, if it's like up tempo jazz, but I like things with a beat, things that have pace that kind of matches my energy. I don't want things that's mellow. I need things with a
That
little bit
makes
of
sense to
chaos.
me. That makes a lot of sense to me.
All right. So I will say this. My question for you. If you could teach that Virginia history class again, or the Northern Virginia, not 12, what are two Fairfax City site visits that you say would have to be on that Northern Virginia history tour?
Well, two that are most obvious is Old Town Hall, which was actually never used. It's also called Huddleston Library, but we're going to renovate that building in 2025. In fact, we're going to close it, sadly. So just a heads up, we're closing Old Town Hall for a year. But as they researched the original architect, who the designer was, what the color scheme was, and to understand who owned it, what family owned it, suddenly this is like really like in the last 6 months come to light the history of Old Town Hall. And the thing is, unless you start searching for it, really digging and looking for it, you don't know. But I will tell you, it was also the meeting space for the KKK.
Yeah.
And again, there's a lot of history that we don't discuss, but you if you're going to understand how we arrived where we are in 2024, you do need to understand the entire history, not the cherry picked, not the whitewashed, not the narrow perspective of making us look better than we are sort of history. So Old Town Hall, and then Blenheim, because Blenheim is where Union soldiers stayed, and there is graffiti that was discovered on. It was actually originally Wilcoxon Farm, and when soldiers stayed there, they wrote messages which had been kept and preserved. So if you haven't been out to Blenheim, there's an interpretive center there, and you can actually see the preserved original writings of these Civil War soldiers. And so I would say those are the two
That's awesome.
most interesting historic places in Fairfax City.
I love that. That's great. As a history major, I nerded out. I like that. All right. So this is the part of the show as we land this plane called shout outs and plugs. So shout outs are anyone you want to show love to. And then plugs. These are things that you're working on or things that I need to put in the show notes so that listeners can follow up with. So the stage is yours. Shout outs and plugs.
Okay. So I'm gonna say that one of the things I was most proud of in 2023, my first year in office, is the city had its first Pride event, at which you're like, wow, 2023, that's kind of late in the game to be having a Pride event for a city, but hey, better late than not at all. And so this year it's going to be on June 1st. There's going to be an event in Old Town Hall, but we have a new format in the city that I love, and it is having events throughout the month. So there was not going to just be one and done event. There is going to be events throughout June for Pride Month. And this came about because of Black History Month. So this year, our Black History Month was not one single event, it was events all month long at venues not just around the city, but also on the campus of George Mason University. We continue to collaborate with our Mason partners on these events like Black History, like Pride. We're now in Women's History Month. So we've got events that are going on in the month of March. I just did the proclamation this past Tuesday night for Women's History Month, and then Hispanic Heritage Month, which is, oddly enough, it is September 15th to October 15th. And there's a very interesting history around Spanish Heritage Month, or Hispanic Heritage Month, being across those 2 months. So when I did the proclamation last year, I realized that there's a lot of Independence Days in the month of September. A lot, like in South America and Central America, lots of countries got their independence in September, and so that makes sense that Hispanic Heritage Month is sort of in that. But then, oddly, Columbus Day is observed in October, ? So I think many of us recognize that Columbus landing in America is not really something we should celebrate, because colonialism and the taking of indigenous people's land is not something that we need to be uplifting and celebrating. So I think that's exactly why Hispanic Heritage Month had been split across those 2 months, from the 15th to the 15th. We had our first ever Hispanic Heritage celebration in 2023, and that was put together, shout out to Elizabeth and Estuardo Rodriguez here in the city of Fairfax. Elizabeth and Estuardo put together the vendors, the dancers, the acts. They organized it, they coordinated it, they did it all. This husband and wife created this event for the benefit of this city, and they deserve a huge shout out. But going forward, I want our city to celebrate its diversity, its people, its residents, its heritage, and its history, all of it. And that is going to be my focus. This is an election year, so I'm just going to tell you, this is an election year. I am going to run for re-election, because 2 years is not enough time to do anything well. So I hope to continue what I have started in 23 and 24, and see us expand all of those things in 25 and 26, if it is the will of the voters.
And how will they find, is there two things? Is there a campaign website that they can follow? And is there a Fairfax County City website that they can follow for all these monthly events?
Sure. So the city's website is fairfaxva.gov. And fairfaxva.gov has everything. And it's where you can find the names and email addresses for the city council members. It's how you can reach out to me. You can find out information about boards and commissions. And here's something else I would float for the Mason community who lives in the city. And I know that lots of the Mason community live in the city. We have boards and commissions that could use your voice, use your energy, use your investment. So don't think that you are not eligible or not qualified to serve on a board or commission. We need a diversity of thought, perspective, and lived experience. And that means the Mason community. So I want to put a plug out for boards and commissions. And I think if you want to find more information about my upcoming campaign, just go to mayorreed.com.
Awesome.
MAYORREAT, mayorreed.com.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Mayor Reed, for that. I definitely will put all that information in the show notes. Positive Philter listeners, please support Mayor Reed and all the wonderful things going on in Fairfax. As a Mason alum myself, and a person that lives on the outside of Fairfax City, but just closely adjacent to it, all the great events, all the things that you shared and doing for the city is a great place to take your kids and do family things, especially over the summer. I'm so excited for summer to come, all the different things like what Rock the Block.
Rock the Block.
In fact,
the first Rock the Block is the Friday before June 1st Pride event. So come out to Rock the Block the last Friday in May, which is the day before the Pride event on June 1st.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. Positive Philter listeners, just know that every episode, as I shared earlier, is dedicated to the memory of my late father-in-law, Jeff Kirsch. So please consider donating to the Jeff Kirsch Anti-Hunger Fund. If you also are a member of the Mason Nation, please consider sending a Pats for Patriots to anyone in the Mason Nation to show love. They get a kindness e-card. We want to share love throughout the Mason Nation. If you listen to this podcast on Apple or Spotify, please give it a rating or review. That's how we elevate the voice of this podcast and elevate so that more people can check this out. Please continue to keep on listening, checking out the show, being kind to each other, and we're out. Thank you for listening to Positive Philter, a podcast that focuses on family, friends, career, with a little self-help along the way. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your family and friends, and like the Facebook page, Spreading Positivity of Movement. Thanks for listening.